Okay, so a little bit about Arlene. Arlene has a blueberry farm in Balderson, and she's also a registered massage therapist, approaching the end of her career as a massage therapist. So, looking forward to seeing what retirement has for her. Um, so every winter, Arlene goes on a bit of a trip, with the exception of last winter, with everything being shut down. But just as a quick recap of some of her more recent trips. So a couple of years ago, she hiked about 1,000 kilometers through New Zealand over our winter time. Previous to that, there was an 800-kilometer hike across or through Israel. Prior to that, it was a hike through Peru and Machu Picchu. She also did Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. Arlene also hiked the base camp Everest in Nepal.
Okay, no, you got
When I was just a teenager, she actually biked across Europe and Southeast Asia. She's visited Japan and Turkey, just to name a few. So that's kind of a brief recap. And we're excited to hear about her trip through Egypt and Jordan. So without wanting to take any more time, Arlene, I'll turn the time over to you.
All righty. So I'm going to go to my pictures and do, sorry, share screen, right? Okay, just.
Oh, sorry, Arlene, before you get going,
Yeah.
Just by way of housekeeping, if you have a question, please just unmute yourself for Arlene and ask the question. Okay, just say question and then and answer it right there while you have the picture up in front of you. As far as bathrooms and water goes, well, the bathroom is your bathroom and the water's in your kitchen. So Arlene, the rest is up to you.
Okay. So after 39 hours in transit, we arrived in Egypt, and it was evening time. And so we got a cab to our first hostel. And I remember driving in the streets and looking out and seeing pictures on this wall of like Egyptian scenes. And I remember thinking, wow, that looks so Egyptian. And and it was kind of like, okay, we're in Egypt. And it was kind of like stepping into a different planet. So this is the balcony beside ours on our first hostel. And the only difference between their balcony and our balcony was that they had pigeons. And this was the stairs. Again, this was a $15 hostel. So we're not talking a high end here, but everything was still very, very nice. And we spent our first day after arriving just kind of wandering the streets of Cairo and eating street food. And the next day we went to the Grand Egyptian Museum. It opened in 2011. And it was full of unbelievable artifacts that were, a lot of them 5,000 years old. What they did for this statue, for a lot of the statues, is they had a black crystal and ivory for the eyes, and they were rimmed in oxidized copper. And so it was pretty wild looking. It literally looked like the eyes were following you. Mummification is a process where the body is embalmed. And what they do is they cut it open and they take out all the internal organs and they wash them and treat them and put them in an alabaster pot outside of the coffin. And the mummification process is only done for priests, royalty, pharaohs, and scribes, and rich people. So it's very interesting, these alabaster pots that they put in it, they go very clear. And these were all just things in the museum, except for the heart. They take the heart out and wash it and put it back in the body, because they believe that in the afterlife, your heart is judged to see where you will spend eternity. And so this is a papyrus of the heart being weighed and judged for the afterlife. This is a statue of a scribe, and I kind of liked the thought that the scribes were part of the ones that got to be, mummies. So King Tut was the only pharaoh whose tomb was found fully intact, and there were over 5,000 solid gold artifacts in his tomb, and his sarcophagus alone had 3 coffins in it like Russian dolls, and these face masks were all of solid gold. He was only 9 when he became king, and he was 19 when he died. This is his ceremonial chair. Again,
I have a question. Sorry.
Yep.
So you said that it's kind of like the Russian dolls. What was the purpose of that? Just to, like, prevent like corruption, or what's the purpose of that? Do you know?
No, it was just it was all about wealth, all of his goods. And because he was a pharaoh, like, I get 3 coffins and they're all solid gold. So
like
that was the only reason. Yeah. And so this is basically his lawn chair. And again, solid gold. This is the only mummies in the museum that were opened were actually King Tut's grandparents. And so this is Thuya, and that was his grandmother. And the reason why they were opened is because they had been robbed and their face had already had the linens taken off them. And so otherwise, any of the mummies, the tombs, the coffins were always closed just out of respect for the dead. But the reasons why his grandparents were open is because they had been robbed. And so there was a lot of papyrus there, and all the papyrus, they still don't know how 5,000-year-old papyrus remains completely, perfectly preserved. So we're out of the museum now, and now we're in Giza, which is basically the same as Cairo. It's just that it's across the river of the Nile. And across the Nile, they call that the city of the dead because it's on the west side and the sun sets in the west. So in ancient Egypt, the west side of the Nile was always the city of the dead. And so that's where these pyramids are. I'm getting an echo. It's from upstairs.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Just turn it down a little bit because I keep kind of startling myself. Thanks, Michelle. So again, these pyramids were 4,600 years old, in the Sphinx, and that was pretty cool. There's 25 million people in Cairo. And these pyramids were not far outside of the city. In fact, they were literally in Giza, which is the west side of the Nile. But it was, they're pretty big pyramids. So here is just hieroglyphics in the tombs. And it was just the entire wall was full. And it was very interesting because we got a guide in the museum, and it helped us to know and piece together these stories. For instance, the little circles that you can see on these hieroglyphs, they're called cartouches, and that's the person's name. And so basically knowing some of the symbols lets you piece together a lot of the stories. And while we were alone for the most of it, these girls here were getting in the sarcophagus and taking pictures, which is a definite no-no. I mean, that's a really distinct lack of respect. And so they asked us, they says, oh, do you want to get in and we'll take your picture? And we're like, no, that's not cool. Anyway, they must have had a hidden camera because this guard came running down and he took their phone and he deleted their pictures. More pyramids, sarcophagus, the Sphinx. So Ramses II was the greatest pharaoh in ancient Egypt, and he was in power 2,000 years before Christ, and he had 200 children, several wives. He had a very big ego because there are huge statues of him everywhere. So this actually was in Memphis, and Memphis was close to Cairo, but it was the capital of ancient Egypt. And it used to be a cosmopolitan city, and that's just a remnant of when it was a city. That was a statue that has been there for 3,000 years. And so this is Saqqara, and Saqqara is this pyramid in Saqqara is the oldest pyramid in Egypt. They have 90 pyramids that they've discovered. And this was the step pyramid system. And it was a really important archaeological site because it initiated this whole pyramid system. So this predates the pyramids at Giza. And you can see that it's sort of like a step pyramid. And it was very interesting. This was the tomb inside it. And if you notice on the roof, it's got stars. And that's so that they could look out, like imitating the night sky. And there was a hole in a wall that there was no door into. And I just sort of put my eye up to the hole, and this is what I saw. So this beard means the person is dead. It's there's different symbols on the statues that say their station or whether they're alive, whether they're dead. So from Cairo, we decided we were finished there. We'd spent a few days and I was ready to get out of the city, and this is a falafel that was just street food. And so we were getting ready for food for this train ride. It was a night train down to Aswan, which is down in the very south of Egypt. And so in Egypt, they have all these, you can see these vegetables in a bag, and those are fermented vegetables. And they eat those with absolutely everything, and they're absolutely delicious. So this was their version of pizza, and you have it with pickles. So this is a picture of a temple called the Philae Temple, and it was on an island outside of Aswan, and it was a temple that was dedicated to the goddess Isis. And it was just in this beautiful, beautiful site. And it was sort of like the first really ancient site, not counting the pyramids that we'd seen, like the first temple that was just so impressive. So that was the figure that you can see on the left. That was the goddess Isis, and she was the goddess of fertility and motherhood and birth and death. So when we were in Aswan, we were staying at a little hostel where there was a few other young kids staying, and I was pretty eager to get hiking because that's kind of what I love to do. And I decided I wanted to hike. There was a Nubian village 20 kilometers on the west side of the Nile that I was hiking to. And so these kids asked if they could join us. And so we ended up, this little group of us, hiking across 20 kilometers across the sort of desert area along the Nile to this Nubian village. Now, the Nubian is a separate set of people, and they've been around for 7,000 years, and they live in the southern Egypt, Sudan border area, but they're a lot more sort of typically African than Egyptian. They look African, they have colorful villages, they have more African style food as opposed to Egyptian food. So there was a little village that I wanted to hike to. And so these were some of the kids that were coming with us, that they were from everywhere, like from Brazil, from Austria, from Ireland, from Switzerland, like they were with us. And so we saw this Norman fortress on the way, and I was so happy just to get hiking again. And for them, it was kind of like, this is great, like sort of like out of the fray. And for me, it was just kind of like, I'm home. Anyway, so because we were on the west side of the Nile, there were all these little holes everywhere scattered around. And there was about a foot clearance at the very bottom. And I sort of half crawled into one. And this is what I saw. So again, each one of these holes were tombs. They were forgotten, had long since had whatever, were not, pharaohs, just probably rich enough people who could afford to have a tomb and be mummied, and they were still there, but it had been sort of abandoned.
Arlene,
And this was,
me.
yeah.
Was that the remnants of a person?
Yep, that's a person in there. That's a mummified person.
Wow.
in her sarcophagus. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So this was the Nubian village, and you can see all the colors, which was pretty cool. We did get there, and so then after that, we went at this hostel. We had asked our host, it was called David's Hostel, about taking a cruise from Aswan to Luxor, which was moving further north again in Egypt. And he got us this cruise for $100. That was a 3-day cruise and 2-night cruise, all inclusive. And I thought that we'd be sort of in a rowboat and sleeping under a tarp. And this was the lobby of this cruise that we took. And the only cruise I'd ever been on was with the family when we went, for a few days as well. And so it was kind of pretty much above my pay grade. And that was David of David's Hostel. And he was just a super, super host. And we rented his place for, I think it was $13 a night. So this was our view from the room. It was pretty interesting. These boats, when we were coming into some locks on the Nile, and these 2 rowboats were just rowing as fast as they could. And I didn't know what was happening, but what they were doing, they were holding up blankets, looking for people to buy them. And so that's what they did, is they would try to sell from their boat to the people on the ship. And this boat held about 350 people, and we were 35 people, and 33 of them were from a Danish tour group. And then there was Gordon and I. And so what one of these guys did is he threw a blanket up, like 2 floors up onto the deck, and one guy was standing there, he just caught it. And they were just so eager for any sales. They're so hurting from tourism. More cruise. So this, after we got off the cruise, this picture is actually out of context. This is crossing the Sinai, but you can see the colors of the stone. So all of the hieroglyphs and the paintings are done by crushed up rock and egg. And I think that's why they're lasting so long, is because they're actually stone. But this is in Luxor. After we got off the cruise in Luxor, we went to, am I talking too fast? It's okay. All right.
Oh, it's great, Arlene.
Okay, so this is the Karnak Temple, and this temple complex is the largest religious complex in the world. It's 250 kilometers, and you can't see the whole thing here, but this is the forecourt, and it's lined on both sides with ram's heads. And this is where normal people got to sort of commune with the gods, and that was because they weren't allowed all the way into the temple. But the ram's heads were a symbol of fertility and power and strength. And this is the great hypostyle, and there were 136 columns going 20 to 25 meters in the air, and they all sort of still had the carvings on them, and it's just impossible to get the scale, but it was quite an impressive sight. This temple complex was 2,000 years in the making, and it started, they started building it 4,000 years ago. And that was kind of the back gate. So from after Karnak and Luxor, so this is in Luxor. Karnak Temple was in Luxor. The Valley of the Kings was in Luxor as well. So again, we crossed the Nile and we rented bicycles for the day for $5 a day. And we rode to the Valley of the Kings, which was about a 25-kilometer trek. And the Valley of the Kings is a grouping of 64 tombs of the pharaohs. And you pay an entrance fee and you get entrance into 4. So what we did is we got a guide, because I didn't want to take my 4 and then choose kind of like bum tombs. I wanted the best tombs. And so this is basically, the ruler across means that tomb is closed to the public. So we went into 4 tombs that we were told to go into by the guides. The guides aren't allowed in the actual tombs, but as you can see how long that corridor is. So basically, when a pharaoh came into power, he started building his tomb, and the length of the tomb was dependent on how long he lived. So he basically just built the tomb until he died, and then his tomb stopped, and that's where he was buried. But the roof and the walls, there was sub-annexes and rooms off, and all of them were just like these intricate, unbelievable paintings and carvings, and right all the way around. And it was all original. Nothing was touched up. Nothing was repaired. Everything was as it was up to 5,000 years ago. And you can see how vibrant the colors still are. It was just astounding. So these are a compilation of 4 different tombs of pharaohs from thousands of years ago. And if we got to see something, it's like, oh, it's only 3,000 years old. It's no biggie. You know, it's just kind of amazing how you can become inured to such splendor. So after we went to the Valley of the Kings, so I would have to say the Valley of the Kings was one of the most startling places we've seen, because we were in there and I was kind of like, we're literally in the tombs of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Like, this isn't Disney World. This is the real deal. And it was just like mind-blowing for us. So from there, we decided we were heading to Jordan. That was our plan, to go to Jordan and start our actual hike. And the Jordan hike was 600 kilometers. I wasn't convinced we were going to get it all done, because there was a lot of it that was across desert, and I've been in desert before, and I know that you need a lot of water, and the water drops were going to be too expensive. So I wasn't really surprised that we had to bus through some of it. So what we did is it was an 18-hour bus ride that circumnavigated the Sinai Peninsula. And again, you can sort of see the colors, and you can recognize the colors of the paintings. So this is in Aqaba. We ended up taking the ferry from Nuabi in Egypt to Aqaba in Jordan. And what you're looking at now is you're looking across into Eilat, into Israel. And that was really nostalgic for me, because that's where I began the Israeli hike that I had such wonderful memories of. So from Aqaba, we went to Wadi Rum, and Wadi Rum is a desert, part of the Arabian desert, which is the driest desert in the world, one of the driest deserts in the world. And you can see this red sand that was actually super, super hard to walk in with our fully loaded packs. But there was astounding formations that was so otherworldly. It's where the Lawrence of Arabia spent a lot of time in the Second World War. And it's also where The Martian, Dune, Aladdin, all these movies were filmed, because it was such extraordinary rock formations. So this was I think our 3rd night in the desert. What we ended up doing is we would carry enough food enough water for 4 days, and we'd hike out for a couple of days and then turn around and hike back, just so that we could get water replenished. But I was sure happy to be back in the desert. And again, just these pictures are just untouched as well. It's just sort of point and shoot with my camera. And this is kind of what we were seeing. They're not edited at all. So the weather wasn't very warm. They were having the coldest winter that anyone can remember in Egypt and Jordan. And this is actually pretty funny. When we were finished at Wadi Rum, they don't have public washrooms, so you just literally have to find a spot. And so I'd sort of gone somewhere, and I was doing my thing, and these dogs came up and they kept jumping up on me, and I'm going, get away, get away. And I'm sort of shimmying down and saying, get away, as they jumped up on me. And so I, of course, thought to take out my phone and take a picture. So but dogs were a big deal there. And certainly when we got further into Jordan, they became a real problem, the shepherd dogs. They got to be kind of aggressive. So this is moving into Petra.
Question.
Yep.
How cold was their winter that was like record breaking?
So we were, a lot of times at the night, we were down to 0 degrees, and we were in our tent, and the days were about between 10 and 15, which is it's not like winter here, but it's certainly not, bathing suit weather. Not that I'd be wearing my bathing suit anyway, when all the women there, a lot of them are in hijabs and burqas, but it still wasn't very warm when you're in it day after day. So that's about the average temperature that we were experiencing. So this is Petra. Petra is a city of rock. It was built between 50 BC and 50 AD. It took about 100 years. It was on the ancient spice route. It was discovered by a young Swiss man, a 27-year-old guy who was searching for this legendary lost city. And what you're looking at here is something that's called El Sig, and it was a 2-kilometer natural gorge that wound around and emptied out. You can sort of, this was the entrance into the city. Now, in its heyday, Petra housed about 20,000 people. And as you come out, you're getting more of a glimpse, and then you're getting more of a glimpse. And then you got the treasury, which wasn't a treasury as we know it. It was actually a mausoleum. It was built by the Nabateans, and they were a very prosperous people because they traded frankincense and myrrh and textiles. And they are still about 35 extended families living in Petra in the caves there. So everywhere along, there were just smatterings of caves, and some were carved in and some were, this is the main colonnade where they would have been having the marketplace along. And they were hit by 300 AD, the city was all but abandoned. After building it and being so prosperous, they had irrigation, they had fountains, they had statues, they had temples. Like, it was astounding, an astounding city of rock. But they were hit with a drought and a flood. And then in 300 AD, there was an earthquake that destroyed a lot of the city, and it was all but abandoned. But the colors of Petra were just astounding. Again, these are just one of thousands of pictures that I could have taken. These are all just sort of pictures of the city. So from Petra, we decided that we needed to get out of the desert because we wanted to get more hiking done. And so we took a bus to the very north of Jordan to a place called Qais. And as we took that bus ride further and further, we sort of took sequence of buses getting smaller and smaller with more and more people on them. And so the last ride was a van with 16 people in it. And I was sitting beside a little fellow called Paulo. And he took a great liking to us and decided that he wanted to show us his favorite place. So he lived in Qais, and he insisted on getting us this takeout food, and he's showing Gordon maps, and he took us home to meet his family. And he was just a lovely young man who just wanted to help us out. He helped us find a hostel, and the next day we started on the Jordan Trail in the Jordan Rift Valley. And so the Jordan Rift Valley was full of greenery and olive trees and sheep and shepherds and shepherds' dogs. Like I say, did prove to be a bit of a problem, but it was quite beautiful. And we really enjoyed our time, and we met such incredible people there. There was one day that was very cold and rainy, and I stopped and I asked, I saw some greenhouses, and I stopped and I asked if we could pitch our tent in their greenhouse. And it was this fellow here, and he inherited this farm from his father. And he says, "Oh no," he said, "you will come into my house." And so he brought us in, and he gave us bread and that za'atar and dipping it in olive oil, and it was just amazing. And this is another family that we met that my ankles really started to give me a lot of trouble. And at one town, I had to just stop. I was just like walking on glass. And so this fellow was with a couple of his friends, and we said, we just need somewhere to pitch our tent. And of course, no one speaks English, so this is all in sign language. And they were so concerned for us. They took us to a school and said we could pitch our tent there because it was a weekend and there was no school there. And that his wife called me or called him and wanted to speak to me and wanted to make sure we were okay and we were fine. But they brought us food that night and then invited us for breakfast the next morning and came and picked us up. And this was just the type of people that were there, that were just showing kindness after kindness. And when we were walking it, Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
When you said they came and picked you up, like I know nothing about Jordan or anything. Do they have cars and stuff?
Yes, yes, they do have cars. Lots of cars. Yeah.
Okay.
They've got cars. And so yeah, he took us to their house, and they've got little heaters because of course it's so cold. And a lot of them just eat on the floor like this and lay out lots of food. And that's the type of bread they have. And so what we were experiencing was their own, like the most authentic Jordanian food. And as you see here, it's a family with a thing spread out. And so what they do there is when people are finished working, they gather up their family and their food, and they go out and they eat outside. They go out for a picnic and they spend time together. And you see this all the time with everybody just out picnicking and being outside and eating together and spending time together and barbecuing. And it's a full day event. So we had been sort of resting over in tall grass, and we got out, and this family were there, and if they saw us walking, they would say, come join us. But of course they're not saying join us because they don't speak English, but they're indicating for us to join them. and just the communication that you have with them, and it was just amazing. Like one thing I really learned, again, the Jordan Rift Valley, just hiking, again, the sunsets were amazing. That's untouched. That's one of the things I learned was that the Muslims, we think so much of the time about them being extremists, but the majority are just such kind, generous, loving people. It was a real eye-opener for me to spend that amount of time there, and I was pretty impressed. This was a Muslim castle in Ajoun, and it was neat. This was another lady. They were very wealthy. She had a lawyer husband and 2 lawyer daughters, and they'd bring their fire right into the house. So this was another interesting thing. We were hiking, and we were expecting to be kind of out in the middle of nowhere with nothing around. So we were kind of a little bit nervous that we'd have enough water to get us through to where we were going to be in civilization again. And we'd crossed this dam, and we'd climbed up this enormous mountain that said that was a very, very steep grade. And at the top, this is what we saw. This, along with about 15 other families, of which we had several invitations to share food. But this was where we were actually setting up our tent, and they were there, and we were kind of, and so they grilled this pita with seasoned lamb over a barbecue, and just, it was wonderful. Again, just one of these picnics that we had with these people. And of this group, the little fellow with the bright blue t-shirt on was the only one that spoke 5 words of English, but somehow we had a lovely, lovely evening. And that patriarch, it was a bunch of brothers, and that patriarch wanted to give me his blanket coat. Just very kind. So then we moved on to Assault, and Assault was recently given a World Heritage Site. And the reason why is because the people were so nice. And I'm actually saying that not facetiously. It's a place where people of all different cultures and backgrounds and faiths live together with harmony. And when we got in there, it was another cold, rainy day, and we were pretty frozen. And we stopped and asked somebody where we could find a guest house. And first of all, it was a shop, and he sat us down and he gave us a drink, and he made some calls. He says, I've got a taxi coming to take you. He says, I'm going to pay for the taxi. I'm like, well, you don't have to do that at all. Like, we can pay for our taxi. He says, no, I have a right to do my duty. And that's just kind of what it was like in Assault. And it was just I think the friendliest place I've ever been. Except they had this very weird preoccupation with mannequins, which were frankly horrifying. Another in Assault. So this is Madaba. From Assault, we went down to Madaba, and Madaba was a mosaic capital of the area. And it was history built upon history. And so they were finding that a lot of houses had mosaics in their basement levels when they dug down, and they had these perfectly preserved mosaics that were from the Byzantine era. It was absolutely fascinating. So this is the Church of Nebo, and that's where Moses went, and that's where Moses is buried, up on this hill of Mount Nebo. And it was where God had him go to show him the promised land. And so they have a church there that is like Moses's church. It was after he escaped from Egypt. And this was inside the church, and again, that was the baptismal font, and there were unbelievable mosaics in that church. And from there, there was a stretch that we were walking down to the Dead Sea, and it was a long, long stretch with not much in it. And what we did is we found we stopped and asked if we could pitch our tent in someone's field, and it was a Bedouin fellow. And he told us to get on his tractor. And I basically, I don't know if you can see, like on the far wheel, there's a metal thing. I was perched on there, and Gord was on the end. And for half an hour, we were bumping along on this, hanging on for dear life, not knowing where we were going or where we were going to end up. And what we did was we ended up at his family's, and they invited us in for dinner. And this was our dinner there. And it was a literal, they were Bedouins, and there was their tent, and that's where they slept. And they didn't want pictures taken of themselves, but they had a little straw thing where they instructed us to put up our tent, and it was a beautiful experience. This is the Dead Sea. From there, we went down to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is 35% salinity. And so you actually can't sink. Nothing lives in it. It's the lowest land-based place in the world, 430 meters below sea level. And it was just astoundingly beautiful. A lot of these things, like, we got to see because we were walking. At this point, my ankles were completely toasted. So we were walking on the road, one for water, and two because it was just not as hard on the ankles. So we got to see a lot of things that you wouldn't really see if you were in a car. So this was just camped on the Dead Sea. It's all salt. And again, really cool rock colors. There was some hot springs there. And so I'm a big lover of hot springs. Now, this was the only time on the trip that I had my bathing suit on, and it's because it was about 6 o'clock in the morning and there was no one around, because there were no women in these hot springs. And when I went in, otherwise, I went in fully dressed, because it didn't feel appropriate to me to be in a bathing suit when women are in hijabs and burqas. I would have felt very uncomfortable. This is Karak. This is Karak. Karak is a famous Crusader castle. And it's funny, it's a famous Crusader castle that's only about 46 years in its very long history that it was a Crusader castle. It was originally built in 850 BC as the king of the Moabs for the Moabite god. And it was a very, very, very interesting castle. It was that night after visiting this castle that I had like a ton of things. So it was very interesting. In Egypt, the sand swallowed my comb. So I had gone, I think at this point, about a month and a half with my hair just in one big mass atop my head, and Gord looked like a Yeti. And so we decided we were going to go and get coiffed. And so for $5 each, we got our haircut. And it was the first time I'd had my hair combed. I hadn't had my hair combed. It was just like dreads. And he did it. It was pretty funny. So at this point, we decided we were finished hiking. We'd been hiking for about 5 weeks at this point, and we'd gone about between 400 and 500 kilometers, but we were tired of being cold, and my ankles were in pretty bad shape. So we decided we'd go back to back to Egypt. So we hiked back to Aqaba and we pitched our tent on this thing. And the next day we walked up to the ferry and found out it was canceled because the weather was rolling in and it was pretty windy. And that night our tent just about blew down on top of us. It was so windy. But then what we did is we went back to Egypt and we went back down to Aswan and decided we were going to see a couple of sites that we hadn't seen because we just didn't have time to do it. So here's just kind of sitting on the market, having some hibiscus tea and cookies. And then we went to see Abu Simbel. Now, Abu Simbel is a site that is 4 hours south into the desert. It's only about 20 kilometers from the Sudan border. And again, it was built by Ramses II. And he had all of these colossal 20-meter high statues of himself. And again, more inside, lots of colossal statues. And so it was basically a temple that was, another, like I say, it was only 3,000 years old. And in Aswan, we also went to a camel market. And we'd been told the price of a camel was about the same as a pickup truck. And so we were kind of interested to see this camel market. And it was a pretty interesting thing, but we had a couple of kids with us as well that we'd met at the hostel. And one was a young German girl, and the attention was just getting too overwhelming. And she'd had about 4 offers of marriage and offers to trade many camels for her. And so we ended up leaving because the attention got too overwhelming. So then we decided we were going to see the White and the Black Desert. And to see the White and the Black Desert, we had to go all the way back up to Cairo and then another 5 hours back down into the Sahara Desert. And it was like, again, stepping into another world. The Black Desert, let me see. No, we're at the White Desert. We took a trip. It was 5 hours down into the desert and we went sandboarding, but this was, didn't think. It was very, very surreal. The white were chalk formations and the black was black basalt and volcanic ash. So we got in there at dusk and all of these formations are just like a millennia of the wind blowing and creating these chalk formations. And then we were back to Cairo, and on the bus ride back to Cairo, I looked to my left out the window and I saw the pyramids, and I just kind of thought, there's the pyramids just on the bus. It felt pretty cool to me. So then we had just a couple of days left in Cairo before we went home. So we started seeing some of the Coptic churches. Yeah, the Coptic are the Christians in Egypt. Most of them are Coptics. And it's a very old religion. It dates back to 43 AD. And it's kind of closely resembling the Roman Catholics, but they have some amazing churches. Now, that was, I think, out of order. We went to Alexandria, the castle in Alexandria, but what I really wanted to see was the Library of Alexandria. It's always been super fascinating for me, even though it's not the original one, of course. It still had a lot of strong ties to it. Had an incredible seafood feast that we paid $15 for, where you just kind of could see anything you wanted, and it was all street food. That's inside the Library of Alexandria. It's the largest public reading space in the world. And a bench in Alexandria. So this is the Coptic mosaics. We got around Cairo by metro. Just some of the Coptic churches inside. You could see where they'd had a fire and they thought this was a real miracle church because they said none of this had been damaged. The fire stopped right where the sacred parts were. And the last thing we saw was the Coptics had made an economy, and it was called Garbage City. And what they did is they gathered all the recycling garbage from Cairo and they sold it. And so this whole city was based on recycling garbage. And it was obviously a lot of garbage, but they built quite an economy with it. And it was literally called Garbage City. They also had a cave church right in that city, and it was full of incredible carvings. It's just kind of interesting. And then we flew home. I was pretty happy to get home at that point. Like I say, my big thing is hiking and being kind of more remote. And so it was a lot of cities, a lot of people, and not as much hiking as I would normally have. But I recognized as well that I couldn't see the things that we saw without being in cities. And it was a pretty spectacular trip for a lot of reasons. But I was always happy to get home. Like I've always said, the only thing nicer than traveling is getting home. We flew Etihad Airways, which was the United Arab Emirates. And if you're going to fly and you have a chance to fly with them, do it. They treat you very, very well. And that's it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Arlene. Is there any questions from anyone in the anyone kind of watching the in the meeting today?
So if you had to pick your two favorite things, what were your two favorite things if we were to go? What would you recommend?
Well, for me, my favorite things are the hiking and meeting the people. So, I mean, I love Northern Jordan because that's where I was meeting and picnicking with locals and spending time with families there and sharing food with them in the most absolutely authentic way you could. If it were a site, then I would say the Valley of the Kings in Luxor in Egypt was, I think, the most astounding to me, just because, again, it was so pure. Yeah, I think that would be my most favorites.
So from your experience, Arlene, when you think about this trip and perhaps others, aside from the kind of the observations that you made about the general population of the Islamic people, what are some of the other things that you've learned just in general? Is there anything that comes to mind that you can share with us? I
think one thing that always comes to mind is that people are kind everywhere. You know, a lot of people read the news and listen to the news and they get so afraid to go places and to do things. And honestly, I'm sure there are different places that are dangerous, but there's been very few times that I've ever felt unsafe. I find that people are kind everywhere. Most people will help you if they can and would like to help you. There's predators anywhere, but it's not away. You know, there's predators anywhere, but there's not that many. Most people are good. Most people are kind. I think that's my big thing is I like meeting people in different cultures and seeing that we're all the same everywhere. And how fortunate we are to live in Canada. That's another thing that I actually is reinforced to me time and time again, is that everybody wants to either, you know, come to Canada or go to the States. Like we're just so blessed and we feel, you know, like things aren't the way we want them to be. But I tell you, you've only got to travel in some third world countries for an extended period of time and realize that we have it pretty darn good. And we're awfully fortunate just by virtue of where we were born. You know, living in Canada or the States isn't something that we earned. It's just something we were fortunate enough to, by virtue of where we were born. And we should never, ever take that for granted because it's a pretty awesome place to live. Yeah.
Thanks. Those are great insights, Arlene. Anyone else have any other questions before we before we close?
Can I just comment
Hmm.
and say that was fantastic, Arlene? That
Oh.
was
Thank-
incredible to hear your stories and the people you met. It's you know, it really brings home to me what you were saying, like people are the same everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. No, we have this feeling like that, you know, people are scary in other places, or, you know, they're not like us. And no, they're not like us, but they are also just exactly like us. Like when we were picnicking with families, and a lot of the ways we communicated was through pictures and showing them pictures. And I saw a lot of pictures of a lot of weddings, and they were pretty excited about their weddings. And it's the same thing. They're just like happy when their kids are happy and want to have them, you know, have a nice wedding, and just all these different things that are still the same. It's pretty eye-opening, really, to travel and just, again, keep feeling such gratitude. And the other thing I always say is I know that it's the theory that it, you know, you bang your head against a wall because it feels so good when it stops. But for me personally, I like living in a state of deprivation where I don't take water or shelter or food for granted, where a lot of times, even when I'm home, I'll still kind of like, oh, this is so cool. I just turn on the tap and I get water coming out. Or, oh, I think I'm going to go to bed. Oh, it's so nice. I just walk up to my bedroom and I lay down. I don't have to set up a tent or anything. And so I personally like having that, where it keeps me feeling grateful for basic comforts, and not taking even basic comforts for granted. Yeah. So I feel like I really whipped through it, and it was just going so fast. I always, I don't want.
Well, I know you had mentioned just the lack of, like when you're mentioning families getting together and going out to share the family meal, and the lack of electronics and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Like the families aren't sitting there on phones. They're talking together, they're playing ball, they're just gathering, and the picnics, they'll do a barbecue, and they sort of, it makes it an evening thing. Like they'll barbecue a bit and they'll eat a bit and they'll barbecue more and eat more. Like it's a gradual process where they just spend time enjoying being together outside. And it was very, very nice to see.
And it's not just because you were there. This is
No,
like their
no.
lifestyle.
No, like these are things that we were like coming across as we walked the country. You know, as we were walking, it's what we saw. And yeah, no, that's just their life. That's what they do.
One quick question, Arlene. Those people that lived in the caves, were you able to see inside of any of those houses? Like, are they sleeping on rock beds or what?
I don't think they're sleeping on rock beds. I think they're pretty well set up in the caves.
Okay.
We actually even saw a couple of satellites.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and sort of just generators. Like I think they're pretty well set up, but I think they've all been grandfathered in, like they've been ancestred in. And it was very interesting. Like they find artifacts in there, and I actually have a Nabatean coin that one fellow that we were sort of like following up a hill, like he lived there, and we ended up giving him some money just because he was pointing out some things to us, but wasn't invasive in any way. But he was like, oh yeah, like I found this, like it was in their cave or somewhere in his wanderings, like he lived there. And so I have this little Nabatean coin. And I was a little bit nervous because it brought back memories of Turkey, where I almost bought this coin and then found out that I probably would have been thrown in jail. But
I think Adam and Sarah have a quick question.
okay, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering, you were talking about, you know, families there and kindness and like, just spending time together. I was thinking, like, I know it's their life there, but is there things, how could I say that? Like their kindness, or just the fact like spending time like that and like no phones, does it make you want to like do that? Because I remember that, for example, in the Book of Mormon, like we read about people, just going in the desert with their tents. And I was watching a video and I told Adam, like, I would like that big tent in my yard, with just like a table. It makes me appreciate to not have like rich stuff, not to judge rich stuff, but like it really made me wanted to have that in my yard, just like the way they're living in the Book of Mormon. So,
Yeah, yeah. No, for sure, for sure. And I think that's part of my appeal with hiking too, is just to completely disconnect and unplug. The only thing is sometimes, like a lot of times I'm alone, and that's okay for me too. But if you're with your family, to like just do that same thing where you're disconnecting and unplugging and just getting very back to the very basics of life. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, good point.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Any-
it's
any other-
there in a lot of ways. There's a lot of people where the life hasn't changed. The life hasn't changed in 3,000 years. They're still living the same way, and they just don't seem to have the same kind of, I mean, it's different in the cities, of course, like in Cairo and stuff, where it's a different thing, but there's a lot of the countryside where life hasn't changed much. Yeah.
I guess the things that carry on, those eternal principles of family, caring for others, those
Yep.
don't change with time.
No, they don't at all. And it's nice to get back to that, it's nice to get back to that. And they really they haven't gotten back to it. They just have never really left it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Any last minute questions before we have our closing prayer?
What was your like favorite hike on this trip, but also like out of all your trips, what was your favorite hike?
My favorite hike was Israel. Israel was a country where I felt very watched, very protected, very guided. I've never actually ever felt unsafe on any of my hikes, with the exception of a couple of instances that were not anything to do other. It was more an animal issue. But on this hike, my favorite part of it was in North Jordan, in the Jordan Rift Valley, where I was experiencing, just so much pleasure at I felt almost honored to share that time with the families there. So I would say on this hike, it was in northern Jordan. I was disappointed I didn't get to hike more of Jordan, again, just because I'd had so much trouble with my Achilles. But I would say my best hike of all time was in Israel. Yeah, the Shvil. And in Israel, they love it that you're seeing their country. They're very, very proud of their trail and their country. And they have a different sense of danger there. Like I was sort of thinking a lot of places on that trail felt so dangerous because there were times when I was on a ledge where I couldn't believe I wasn't on a rope. And they're like, oh, no, that's not dangerous. And I realized that they kind of have lived in a place where danger is being bombed, not falling off a ledge. So, but no, I felt I loved Egypt, Israel, and seeing the sights, like the Church of the Nativity, like the place where Christ was born, and those things were very, very powerful sights. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much, Michelle. Shirley, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did want to say I really like the photography. I mean, you don't even see pictures like that on the on the stations or the documentaries. Pictures are really, I really like them.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So Arlene also has a blog, The Flip Side of 50, it's called, right?
Yep, flipside of
So
50.com.
if anyone is interested in reading about past trips, I think you have probably a decade's worth of pictures and experiences on that blog as well, don't you, Arlene?
I think I do, because I'm actually now the flip side of 60. And so, so I would be having a decade of trips. But honestly, if you were thinking of reading a trip like the Israel is on, you'd have to scroll back a piece. Israel was in 2015. But that was a pretty cool trip.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to give a closing prayer, and then refreshments will be served in your own kitchen. And I hope you have a great evening. So I'll say our closing prayer. Our dear Father in heaven, we're thankful to have had the chance of being here this evening and hearing about Arlene's experiences. We pray that thou wilt bless us in the different things that we'll be doing, that we'll be able to be kept safe. And we're reminded of the many blessings that we have and that we enjoy in this beautiful country. And we're reminded of the enduring value of love and the importance of family. Pray that thou wilt help us to keep this in the forefront of our mind. We give thanks, Heavenly Father, and offer this prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Have a great evening, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you for sharing your
Bye-bye.
experience.
Yes, thank you so much.